Find a new way to live in Toronto's coveted Forest Hill neighborhood. Foray by Canderel blends thoughtful, livable suite design with refined finishes and more than 50,000 square feet of amenities, including wellness spaces, work-from-home areas, fitness facilities, and places to unwind. A modern, elevated community crafted for the life you've earned. Your next home starts from $599,000. Learn more at live@foray.ca. That's live at FORET.ca.
מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל. היא מדינת ישראל.
That scratchy recording is Israeli leader David Ben-Gurion declaring the State of Israel on the 5th day of the Hebrew month of Iyar, 1948, exactly 78 years ago today by the Hebrew calendar. And while the moment was technically a declaration, it was really more of a hope or maybe a prayer. Sitting in a secure basement in Tel Aviv, the founders of the Jewish state presiding over a theoretical country without clear borders, security, enough food, or many international allies. Did they envision that Israel would grow into a home to nearly 10 million people and become a leader in innovation and entrepreneurship, and develop the most powerful military force in the Middle East that today fights shoulder to shoulder with the world's most powerful country, but become a pariah at the very United Nations that birthed it out of the Nazi genocide? Perhaps Israel's founders also couldn't have imagined the way things have stayed the same, as Israel is celebrating its birthday between two fragile ceasefires, one with Iran that's been extended and one with Hezbollah. 78 years ago, the state was declared in secret, with a typed invitation, a rushed ceremony, and a sense of both triumph and fear. Today, those artifacts still exist, preserved by collectors like David Matlow, but the story they bookmark is lived by people like Hadassa Kingstone, a Canadian born in Israel before 1948, who has returned to watch her country become what it is today, absorbing losses and through political turmoil. Today, we revisit these moments through their eyes, a North Star Yom ha-Atzmaut edition. I'm Ellin Bessner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, April 22nd, 2026. Welcome to North Star, the flagship podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, and made possible thanks to the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Why did David Ben-Gurion rush to declare the state in the basement in secret? And why did they almost call Israel by a different name? Later, we'll hear from Hadassa Kingstone, a former Montrealer who remembers listening to the United Nations vote when she was growing up in Israel, and who now, closing in on her 90th birthday, is still living her native country's story. But first, David Matlow, the Canadian lawyer, has the world's largest collection of Herzl memorabilia and Zionism artifacts. And for 5 years, he's been telling Israel's story through his weekly Treasure Trove columns in the CJN. Here's our conversation from 2021 as he took us back to the turbulent hours of the birth of the nation. Hello, David. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Ellin. Thanks for having me.
So you have an artifact to show us, and tell us about it and maybe about the environment in which it was produced.
What I'm going to be showing is an invitation to the Declaration of Independence ceremony, which took place at 4 p.m. on Friday, May 14th, 1948. This was the ceremony where David Ben-Gurion read the Declaration of Independence. And the invitation, which was for the most momentous event in the history of the Jewish people for the last 2,000 years, was a plain piece of paper, typed, folded, delivered by bicycle courier. And it invited people to the Tel Aviv Museum, which is on Rothschild Street, and that's where the Declaration of Independence was read. So why was it in that building? And the reason was that was a very secure building, and the ceremony itself, instead of being in a theater or an auditorium or outside, was in the basement of the building, because there was concern that it would be interrupted by enemies of Israel, the Arabs, who had already started fighting with the state even before it was created.
So you said that it was, I want to look at it for a second. It talks about the location. It doesn't really say whose names are, there's no names. It's just sort of like the collective or, like it's kind of anonymous. It seems weird, no, for a formal invitation.
There were 300 or so people invited. It was a very small room. And the invitation says to keep this a secret. But to answer your question, what was the mood like at the time? On the one hand, there was great jubilation and excitement, but there was also great fear. The prior day, on Thursday, May 13th, in Kfar Etzion, there was a massacre of 127 Jewish men and women. That David Ben-Gurion learned about that at 2 a.m. on May 14th. So he was seized with this heaviness of the great risk and danger that the enemies of the new state were gathering to do harm and to destroy it as soon as it was born.
Like, why did they choose to go the 14th?
It's an excellent question. The UN Partition Resolution of November 29th, 1947, which called for the creation of a Jewish state, contemplated that the British mandate would end within a specified period. And the British decided to leave as a final shtuch to the Jewish people at midnight on Friday. So it had to be done before sundown, before Shabbat, which is why the declaration ceremony took place at 4 o'clock.
So then the next thing that happened was, of course, they had a state, and as a state, they have a sitting of the government. So what's your next artifact, and how does that relate to the next steps?
The very first action of the state, which was recorded in this book, the Iton Rishmi, it's like the official gazette that we have in the Parliament of Canada. The very first item in this is from 1948, is the Declaration of Independence. And after that, the first law passed simultaneously with the Declaration of the State of Israel was to terminate the restrictions that the British imposed in the White Paper of 1939. The very first act of the new Israeli government was to eliminate all restrictions on immigration to Israel and all restrictions that the British imposed on Jews buying land in Eretz Yisrael. And just imagine all the things that you need to do between the Thursday, May 13th, and Friday, May 14th, to have a state in creation. Army, police, telephone system, highways, currency, everything, including postage stamps, which is the next interesting and third item that I want to share with everyone.
Okay, so this postage stamp that you have as a first day cover, there's something missing that one would expect to see on the first stamps of a new country, is there not?
Yes, well, absolutely. If you look at this, and those who read Hebrew would see Doar Ivri, Hebrew Post, and it was issued May the 16th, which is the Sunday. The declaration was on the Friday. This is on the Sunday. So why does it say Doar Ivri? And the reason is because these stamps had to be printed before the name of the country was known. It was only when David Ben-Gurion read the Declaration of Independence did the world know that the new country would be called Medinat Yisrael, the State of Israel.
That is incredible. When did they print the next stamps that actually had the State of Israel's name on it?
It was for the high holidays, which would have been in the fall, so 4 or 5 months later.
One last thing I want to ask before we end. Now, is it true that the State of Israel may have not actually been called the State of Israel at the last minute? They had to make a decision. It's like naming a child. Usually you know what you're going to name the child, but not in this case.
So there were discussions in connection with settling all the myriad of items to create the state on that Friday, what the country would be called. There were choices, Eretz Yisrael, Ever, Yehuda, and ultimately it was decided to be Medinat Yisrael, and the world only knew about that when David Ben-Gurion said that the name of the country is Medinat Yisrael, the State of Israel.
David, thank you so much for your treasure trove for the CJN.
My pleasure.
For Matlow, Israel's history is personal. His 98-year-old father, Irving Matlow, is one of the 300 Canadian volunteers who fought in Israel's War of Independence, and only recently became an Israeli citizen himself. David's sister and her family also live in Israel. Coming up, from life under the British Mandate to surviving October 7th, Hadassa Kingstone's story parallels the state of Israel's history. Hadassa Kingstone was born in 1936 in Haifa under the British mandate at the time. She was 11 when the United Nations voted to partition the country into an Arab and a Jewish state.
I don't think there's anyone who doesn't remember the night. It was 29th of November, and it was the United Nations.
We shall proceed to vote. Those who are in favor will say yes. Those who are against will say no. And the abstainers, always they know what to say.
And I remember a lot of people sitting around the old boxed radios. Do you remember?
We will start it now.
And the counting.
Belgium?
Yes.
Bolivia?
Yes.
Afghanistan?
No.
Cuba?
No.
Egypt?
No.
Dominican Republic?
Yes.
Greece?
No.
Canada? Yes.
It was...
15, 16, 17,
you couldn't breathe. And at the end, of course, they came and they said...
The resolution was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
Yes, we have a country. And in 2 seconds, everybody was outside on the street. There was a bonfire in the middle of the street, and music, and people were dancing.
I've known Hadassa almost my whole life. Her son is a close childhood friend of mine from when I grew up in Montreal, where she worked at the Israeli consulate and then later in the library of a Jewish day school. It was only recently that I understood how extraordinary her life story is. She's an eyewitness to some of the most important moments in Israel's history. After Israel's founding, she moved to Montreal for 3 decades before returning to Tel Aviv, where she's lived for the past 36 years, today living with sirens and safe room runs, sometimes unable to make it there in time because of her back. 2 years ago, a rocket hit the building right next to hers. Here's my conversation with Hadassa from the spring of 2023, where she explains how her parents got to Israel just before Hitler closed the escape routes from Europe.
My father went to the army, to the Romanian army, and when he came out of there at the age of 24, by that time he knew my mother, and he said at 24, he said, Europe is not for the Jews. And he decided to go to Israel. He went to Israel, couldn't bring my mother because at the time it was the certificate season, you couldn't go in without a special permission from the British. So he went thinking that he'll work and then he'll bring my mother. It took 2 years. They came to Israel in 1935. I was born in 36. And of course, a lot of the family went to the usual doors, unfortunately, in camps. My grandparents on both sides went. My father's 3 sisters went. My mother's parents went. I am an only child. We were in Israel. We all survived. My father was working in the biggest match factory in Israel called Nur. He was the accountant. And one day, one of the Arabs came to him and he said, if you want to survive, you pick up right now and run away. We lived in Kiryat Motzkin, which is one of the small villages outside Haifa in the north. And by the time he closed his bag and went out, the first dead was already lying there.
Do you remember being afraid of the Arabs in the late 30s, like when you were 3, 4, 5 years old?
No, not at all. First of all, we lived in an area which was all Jewish. They lived in the villages around, and they used to come in. They used to come to sell eggs, for example. The women used to come to do the wash, the laundresses, I don't remember ever being afraid. There was no reason, My parents, maybe my father saw another extreme of this, but I never went through. I was afraid of the British. I was scared of the British. There was no question about that.
And what happened with your father's Haganah duties?
He actually worked in the Haganah. My father was a general manager of a rice factory or whatever you call it, the first one in Israel, the biggest one in Israel. He was running it. And he used the place to hide guns. There were all kinds of hush-hush things. From our apartment, they did radio that they used to come. It was a no-no. And they used to come. I remember her, this little woman with the glasses, with a little suitcase. She would run in with some people. They would close all the doors and keep her in an inside room. And she did all of the announcements against the British from our house. And I remember boats coming with the immigrants. They would come at night, they would spill out of the boats, and the Israelis would wait for them. They would exchange clothing and take them to all kinds of places. So I remember a few times people coming and staying overnight in our house, but they got new clothing, new papers, food, and they kept on going, the next day.
Was your mother involved at all in any of the clandestine resistance activities too?
Yeah, my mother was a watchwoman. They had certain specific places, especially where you had the wadis, the mountains going down, they had people watching there all the time. So she did her duty there.
During elementary school, Hadassa remembers her father served as an anti-aircraft gunner, and her house came under fire from 1940 to 1941 during the Second World War.
He was trained as an anti-airplanes gunner, so he fought as a gunner. I remember the Second World War when the Italians bombed Israel. I remember the shelter. My mother always laughed. She said, the minute we heard the alarm, I was the first one in the shelter. I went so fast, nobody could keep up with me.
She attended the Reali School and describes those years before the establishment of the state as normal. Now a preteen, Hadassa experienced the elation of the November 1947 partition plan. And 6 months later, the Declaration of Independence in Tel Aviv on May 14th, 1948. But while Jews in the world celebrated, the mood in Israel turned grim. They knew they were in for the battle for the survival of the young state in the War of Independence.
Nobody was afraid until the next morning. But that night, it was, I don't think, I can't remember any kind of an elation in anything happening as it was that night. It was unbelievable. And that when I was in the generation that we were 300,000, and then by 47, 48, I think we were 600,000 Jews. That's all what Israel had. So there was a closeness that you don't find today or anywhere. There were difficult years. There was not very much to eat, and whatever we ate came in big boxes from the States, like the eggs came in a form of powder, and sugar they didn't have, and the coffee was chicory that you couldn't swallow, and you got a little piece of fish like that per person a week, and butter. I had a tiny little piece of butter for the whole week. So I remember the attack on Haifa. The same man who was the policeman who worked with the Englishman, he was driving around the streets, among others, with the megaphone, and they were begging the Arabs not to leave. Don't go. Stay in the city. We won't touch you. Everything will be fine. But the Arabs, on the other side, kept on screaming, run away, because the Israelis are coming. They're going to murder you. They are going to finish you. They're going to... So unfortunately, they all went away with the food on the plate and the pots being simmered on this, and they went away. But I remember when they keep on saying, but they came I remember them going around and saying, don't run away, stay, you'll be protected by us. And it's true that Haifa is one of the few cities that's, the two sides are living together side by side in the same buildings and same this. It's amazing.
Were you doing anything as well yourself to help the Yishuv and whatever you were doing?
No. The 16, 17 years old joined the, and I know my neighbors, I remember the son who was murdered, but we were too young.
When it was her turn, Hadassa served in the Israeli army in the 1950s, as so many young Israelis do after their national military service. Hadassa was ready to travel. She was 21, and she first went to Amsterdam to seek out some of her family's relatives who'd survived the Holocaust. Next, she landed in Canada in 1959, and she took a job at the Israeli consulate in Montreal. It was a glamorous spot for the young Sabra, where she met and married an up-and-coming Montreal lawyer, David Kingstone.
My English was not perfect. I left Israel on a boat. called the Pace. I felt for the first time how it is to be in a foreign country. And it was good. I had no problem. It was the times that when I came afterwards to Canada, coming from Israel was a big deal. You were born in Israel, you lived in Israel, your parents are there. How is it? Everywhere I went, it was wow. It's dissipated with the years, almost disappeared. I'll tell you, the first time I remember getting a phone, we lived on Iona, across from the school. I remember getting a phone call. I picked up the phone and somebody started on the other side cursing me. Dirty Jew, what are you doing here? Get out of here, go to your own country. I put down the receiver. I said, I'm going back home. For me, it was the first time I came through across anti-Semitism. Who knew what is anti-Semitism? My parents told some story, then it told few little stories that were really non-stories, nothing. But that's left a big mark on me. In Canada, in Montreal, then I heard the other side. There was a lot of anti-Semitism.
At the consulate, Hadassa had a front row seat organizing the official visits to Canada by some of Israel's legendary leaders, including Golda Meir. She was foreign minister then. She would later become Israel's first female prime minister.
Would you please rise and join with me in a very hearty shalom to Her Excellency, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, Mrs. Golda Meir.
The whole city was invited, and all the who's and who's in the Jewish, community always thought that they have to be the first in line. But I remember the cigarettes, I remember the heavy shoes, the handbag. She was not important things.
Other leaders filed through Hadassa's office at the consulate, Pinchas Sapir, the finance minister, and later she met Menachem Begin, who enchanted her youngest child, Astri. Hadassa watched from afar as her homeland grew, but also Israel's perpetual wars, including the stunning capture of land in the Six-Day War of 1967. In times of crisis, Hadassa and her community in Montreal rallied around the young state. Even 50 years ago, when Israel was blindsided by the launch of the Yom Kippur War in October of 1973, Hadassa's 37th birthday, the war was utterly devastating and one of the darkest moments in Israeli history. And in 1990, when Hadassa's 3 kids were grown and had their own careers, she convinced her husband Danny to leave Montreal and move to Israel, just in time for the Gulf War.
You didn't leave the house. They came, you had few seconds until they exploded. So we covered everything with plastic sheets, from the ceiling down to the bottom. And we were supposed to close off an area where we have the bathroom and a little refrigerator or something with food on the side, because you were not supposed to go out the minute it falls. They thought it was all going to be chemical, this is why it's... And the first night, the first rockets fell in Tel Aviv. The alarm came and we put the masks on. And then he says, I'm choking. Look at him. There's 2 openings for the air, and it was closed. He forgot to open it. So that was a very different kind of a war.
For the past 36 years living in Tel Aviv, Hadassa Kingstone's been impacted by many more key events in Israel's history, including the turbulent street protests of the mid-1990s. Very reminiscent of the anti-Netanyahu pro-democracy protests she also attended, sitting outside her seniors' residence, at least before October 7th.
We go out for 2 hours, we sit on the stairs in front of the building. So we put chairs and we sit there with big... Besides that, it's important, it's very exciting to go out into a protest believing very strongly in what you are fighting for.
She's sick about the recent sharp turn to the right of Israeli politics.
I watch TV and I just feel like sitting and crying. I can't believe how everything is falling apart. Lies and lies and lies and hatred and looking down at people. Terrible, terrible, terrible. It's not what it used to be.
What do you think your parents would have thought if they were still alive today?
What my mother always said, could have been such a wonderful place, such a beautiful country. It could have. We would drive in the car and go to Haifa, I would bring them to Tel Aviv, and my mother and I always, look at the flowers, look at the colors. And my kids still today laugh at that. I kept saying, תסתכלי, כמה זה יפה. She said, yeah, could have been a wonderful country. It's a very disappointing feeling, yeah. But hopefully, I don't know if they'll settle this business now and we will be able to clear it off the table. Maybe. We need the Jews of the diaspora. This is what we need, and we don't have them. We're losing them left and right. The American Jews, the students, they go to university, they don't even want to hear about Israel.
Is it changing how you feel?
No, I think that they should celebrate because we did get here, and what we did here is unbelievable. Unbelievable. And people deserve to be happy about it, and they deserve to celebrate. And we're having, in a few days, we have Yom HaShoah on Monday night. Few days later, just before Yom Ha'Atzmaut, we have Yom HaZikaron to the soldiers. We have so many sad things. We have family being torn apart now with the whole story of the politics. They should throw everything out the window and go and celebrate. Celebrate for what we have achieved, what we have done, what we have here, and hopefully we'll have here. Today it's very easy to be negative about it, but we can't afford it.
What are you the most proud of?
I suppose that we have survived all of these years. We have built an incredible country, and we have survived against everybody's ideas and feelings that we'll never make it. It's really a wonderful country with wonderful people. From time to time, fall down a little bit, but we get up and we keep on going. And I love it here. I love the beach. I love the weather. I love my friends here. And I love living here. That's the bottom line. I love living in Israel.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounded like for this episode of North Star, brought to you by the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. The documents that David Matlow preserves tell the story of how Israel began, and you can follow his weekly columns via the link in our show notes. Hadassa Kingstone will turn 90 this fall. How are you marking Israel's birthday during these complicated times, and where? Write to us at info@thecjn.ca. Our show is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman, with Michael Freeman as the executive producer and Alicia Richler as the editorial director. Thanks for listening.